Benedicite Dominus. Welcome to question 141 of the Secunda Secundae. The topic for this lecture is temperance. We're starting a new cardinal virtue this time, and I'm Dr. Thibault. So to start this new section, look at first the catechism. Whenever there's a topic that's also covered in the catechism, I figure it's kind of helpful to look at what the catechism says. Although often the catechism is a summary of quite a bit of what St. Thomas had written in the Summa. So I won't go into any great detail here because to flesh out the catechism would really be to flesh out these 8 articles of this question 141. So we will get to parts of it throughout. Some of the interesting parts is that this is about keeping mastery over one's desires and to focus one towards that which is honorable, which is in its right order. These appetites that we have, the sensitive appetites, they need to be held in the proper order to direct us to the proper ends. And this, as St. Thomas, as the Catechism points out, is seen throughout scriptures. In the Old Testament, do not follow your desires, but restrain your appetites. And in the New Testament is probably more common, where we see it used in terms of the words moderation or sobriety. You see this a lot in St. Paul about how to live properly is about restraining these appetites. So this, I think, is an important section, especially for anyone who's a good Pauline person. Another article of the Catechism, 2290, gives it a little more focus, or a little more general focus. Is that a contradictory general focus? Where it says temperance disposes us to avoid every kind of excess, use of food, alcohol, tobacco, medicine, because the effects of these things, drunkenness, love for speed, they endanger yourself and they endanger others, right, in the road, sea, or air. So this is looking at temperance, which St. Thomas will later call in a more generalized way. Right? In some ways, it's a general way. But we'll get into those distinctions between general temperance and special virtue of temperance. The first article, again, there's 8 articles. The first one is temperance a virtue? It's probably quite obviously yes. A virtue inclines a man to good, right? It inclines a person to do the good. So temperance inclines the person to do good, right? Right. That's kind of obvious. Human virtue inclines man to do something in accordance with reason. Right? Another point. So does temperance incline a person to live according to reason? Yeah. Again, yes. Right? So if a person wants to have a glass of wine with dinner, that is reasonable, right? It might incline a man towards the good, right? Enjoying a nice glass of wine with dinner might be a good. If we look to the first miracle of Jesus, the wedding of Cana, he provides wine for the wedding party, so there's no problem with that. Now, if a person is an alcoholic, is it still good? Well, no. It's no longer good if you're an alcoholic, because it's detrimental to you. Also, is drunkenness good? Well, no, right? It defies what is reasonable. It's no longer according to reason for a person to be drunk like that. So temperance properly guides the appetites to the proper ordering, right? Which ultimately is what leads us to greatest happiness. Be happier if you drink the proper amount of wine and not the improper amount of wine, especially the next day. And also temperance inclines a man to good and moderates the concupiscible desires, according to St. Thomas. The next article is temperance a special virtue? And like many of the virtues, the answer can be yes and no, especially when we get to these um, cardinal virtues. It can be yes and no. So in a in terms of no, no, that temperance can be just a general virtue with common signification. So if it's just about regulating how much you're going to eat for breakfast, and then regulating how much news you're going to watch, and then regulate how much sleep you get. And well, that's everything, right? Everything in life is about regulating. So this is like that second line from the Catechism. It controls excesses of everything. Any general overseeing of the proper ordering of things in terms of excess and deficiency is dealing with temperance, which is in every virtue. So in that regard, it's general. It's a general virtue. Now it's also a specific virtue, and St. Thomas says because you're dealing with um, temperance deals specifically with the most seductive things, right? The most pleasurable things, the things of the flesh that are the most difficult. Right? So something like uh, food, drink, and sex. Those are the three St. Thomas points out. These are the most seductive things. Therefore, they are most likely to, they're most difficult to overcome. Therefore, this is a special virtue in regards to those difficult things. Likewise, fortitude was really, a firmness of mind, right? So, do you need a firmness of mind for everyday life? Of course. Right? In some ways, fortitude is general. But fortitude as a special virtue was to endure the fear even of death, dangers even of death. So, a martyr walking to the Colosseum or carrying the cross, that's a special virtue, not to run in that situation. How about just, being patient in traffic? Yes, in a general way, but they're for the hardest situations. So temperance in its hardest way is a special virtue. Now, is temperance about desires and pleasures? Yes. So, as fortitude was about the irascible appetites, those things that deal with fear, right? The negative things, fear, sorrow. Um, Temperance deals with the concupiscible appetites, which deal with pleasures, primarily pleasures of the flesh, desires and pleasures. Um, that's where they are the strongest. So it's directing things which in general are good, right? Food and sex and drink and nice clothes and a good climate and a lovely house, right? All these things that are pleasurable. It's all putting them in the right order according to reason. It moderates these pleasures. You can see sometimes people who go too excessive, they get too excessive with their pleasures, hedonists, right? And it properly orders them. When we think of a lot of times the four idols that get in the way, wealth, honor, uh, pleasure, power, this regulates the pleasures. All of the cardinal virtues regulate some of them, some of these idols. Temperance is uh, about desires and pleasures of the flesh. In some ways, these 8 articles, some of them can get a bit repetitious, or the articles that St. Thomas is talking about might not be that interesting. They might not be the questions you might ask, but St. Thomas is trying to cover all the bases. Um, so temperance, according to St. Thomas, is really pleasures of uh, about pleasures in general, but particularly again in food, drink, and sex, because these are the most um, uh, powerful, right? These are the most uh, difficult. Um, and perhaps maybe they're most difficult because they're dealing with things which are most necessary, right? So if you think of somebody who's dealing with eating disorder, in some ways it's harder than dealing with alcoholism. Um, Not to compare whose life is harder, but just say you have a problem with alcohol. Okay, you need to cut alcohol out entirely, right? Don't go to bars. Don't hang out with your drinking friends. Stay away from alcohol entirely. In some ways, that's easier because it's so black and white. Food, on the other hand, is tough. You can't stay away from your friends who eat. You can't stay away from the grocery store or restaurants. You can't fully, you could keep alcohol out of your house. You can't keep food out of your house. Right? So some of these are the most difficult. The other thing, like sexual pleasure, right? Sexual pleasure is a good thing. But it has to be in its proper ordering, right? So that's the difficult part. The human person might have sexual desires, but some of the greatest people have fallen because of their sexual desires, right? People like King David or King Solomon, you have these great people, and then what's their downfall? The sexual desires. So these need to be overcome in order to uh, live well, right? It doesn't matter all the other virtues. This could be the thing that takes down the greatest of the Jewish kings. Could be this. So, in terms of Article 5, we are now dealing with how about the sense of taste, right? I think Thomas focuses a lot on the sense of touch. So, eating is touch, drinking is touch, sex is touch. You can kind of see it. It touches the body, right? It's something tangible. That's why sometimes I say they're of the flesh. They're tangible, corporeal. How about the sense of taste? Well, St. Thomas says yes, it touches. It touches the mouth. And savory foods are good. Spiced foods, things that have flavor. It's good. But the primary purpose of food is to provide nutrition for the body, right? So properly ordering food, you should eat food first, which is going to provide nutrients for the body in the proper amount, not too much, not too little. And then secondarily, you think about the flavor. You think about the savoriness. Um, so in this regards, yeah, it is a sense of touch. And St. Thomas says it's more important than the sense of smell or sight. In terms of temperance, temperance for him isn't really that much about the sense of sight or smell. It's really about things that are tangible, in terms of smell touching the inside of our nose, or I guess there's still something physical there, but to look at something is not really touching your eyes. Um, it's more about what's touching the body. It's more important to St. Thomas than these other senses. And these might not be questions we would be thinking about with temperance. It might not be a question I would ask, but St. Thomas spends 2 questions talking about that, 2 articles. So the next one, Article 6, in my opinion, they start getting into more interesting questions again. Temperance is primarily about the present life, which I think makes sense. In heaven, is there temperance? Not really. It's kind of built in. The feast of heaven is probably within moderation. But temperance in the present life is important, right? So it's a moral good consists chiefly in right reason, right? Holding a good in the right order. Um, so it's about the most difficult things of pleasure in the right order. And it directs things towards their final end, right? The final good end. So what is the purpose of sexual pleasure? Well, according to the church, right, it would be within the context of marriage, open to children, purpose of uniting husband and wife together in a co-creative way with God, possibility of bringing forth children. Right? That it's directed towards the unity of the couple and the procreation of the human race. Right. So there's those two elements built into the final ends of sexual pleasure. How about for food? Well, it's to create nutrients for the body so the body can stay healthy, so it can love and serve God, right, in this life and in the next. So it has a purpose. But it's really within the context of this human life that we have. So is temperance a cardinal virtue? And the answer is quite obviously yes. It's one of the four cardinal virtues, and the contra arguments are often yes. It's listed among the cardinal virtues, but the reason why is that cardinal virtues have the foremost claims of praise. Right? They're the most praiseworthy of the virtues, and St. Thomas says moderation in a general way always requires some level of praise. Anytime a person is moderate, there's praise. But since temperance deals with the most difficult pleasures, it deserves even the greatest praise. Right? So if a person is very attractive and very powerful, and it's a guy, musician or a pop star of some kind, they have thousands of girls throwing themselves at his feet. Right, the temptation is everywhere. Right, if the person maintains chastity and marries and then stays faithful to his wife, uh, this is in some ways extremely difficult. Right? Perhaps more Calvinist or more coming from a different perspective might not think that this is very hard, right? Of course you'll do it. A Kantian, for example, Immanuel Kant. Of course you'll do it because you have a duty to it. But coming from this Aristotelian Thomistic perspective, they can honestly say, yeah, sometimes this can be tough, right? This can be hard. The rock star, tons of opportunity, and they have to turn it down. It's a great, temperance is great. If you think of some of these famous actors and actresses, particularly young ones who became famous for almost no reason, um, drugs and alcohol and sex and these things, they can lead to a person's demise, their utter demise. In some ways, they're not being held back by money or by anybody else. Therefore, the only thing that can hold them in check is temperance. If they can be held in check, then it is truly a virtue, right? It's one of these great virtues. Now, if it were me, well, I don't have as many of these opportunities, so I don't, perhaps I don't have the greatest ability to exercise temperance. But you practice it in your day-to-day life to create that habitus for it, right? If you only get challenged with this, the day after you win the lottery, right? And then all of a sudden you have a lot more opportunity. If you haven't developed it in your life where you are, then you're not going to have it later on. We're finally to the last one. Last article. Article 8 is temperance the greatest of virtues? And really the answer in some ways is no, it's not the greatest of virtues. I put it as the lowest of virtues. It's not really the lowest of virtues either. It's the lowest of virtues among the 7 virtues that we looked at. So the three theological virtues, faith, hope, and love, and then the 4 cardinal virtues, prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. St. Thomas put them in order of importance, significance. Temperance is last, the last among the 7. And the reason why is that Fortitude and justice, the ones directly above temperance, they are higher because they deal with the common good, the communal good. So justice isn't just about you, it's about your whole community. Fortitude isn't just about you, it's about your whole nation. Right? Soldiers having fortitude in war, for example. Right? This is for the good of your country, not just your individual good. Whereas temperance is more individual. It's really based on more individual idea. Although that's 2290 of the Catechism points out, drunkenness can lead to dangers of the air, sea, and sky. Um, so there can be a communal element of it, but temperance is more individual versus fortitude and justice, which is more communal. So because it affects more people, it's more important. Prudence is the mother of all virtues. Regulates all the virtues, therefore it's more important. And if you look at the theological virtues, faith, hope, and love, these are about God and eternity and salvation. So these are more important. Whether or not you eat an extra donut is less important than having faith, right? So it's important, but it's not as important as the theological virtues. But St. Thomas does point out that temperance might not be as high as the other virtues, but they are perhaps more common, right? So how often do you have to show fortitude in war? Probably not very often. How much do you have to show moderation in terms of food and drink and sex? Every day, multiple times a day. So in some ways, um, temperance might be the lowest, but it might be the one that has the greatest impact on your day-to-day life, um, at least among the cardinal virtues. So in conclusion, temperance is a virtue in terms of dealing with the most difficult elements of pleasure. It's a special virtue. Temperance is about desires and pleasures. It's creating the right order, orderliness to them to bring about the proper ends. Uh, St. Thomas spends a lot of time focusing on this as being about touch. That temperance deals with flesh. It's about what you can touch, right? Food, drink, sex. You can extend it a little bit to taste because there's still that sense of touch within taste. But it's really not about uh, visual or smell or other senses. It's more tangible. Temperance is about the present life, right? It's about properly ordering the present life towards the final end. It is a cardinal virtue because it deals with overcoming pleasures, very difficult pleasures, the most deeply rooted pleasures within our reptilian brain. Right? It's properly ordering them. And lastly, temperance is the lowest of the virtues, of the seven virtues, but it is perhaps one of the most common ones, particularly among the cardinal virtues. So it's one that needs the most practice. So next we'll move on to the vices associated with temperance.